Whenever I take a self-portrait, I don't just press the shutter. Instead, I imagine the frame as a movie still. So long before I take the photo, I ask myself, who's the character? What's their story? What emotion should you, the viewer, feel when you look at this image? Because for me, photography really is about storytelling. It's kind of like cinema without the sound. And in this video, I'm going to show you 5 tips to bring that cinematic magic into your own photography. Let's get into it. Alright, so how do you actually do that? How do you take a photo and make it feel like a scene from a movie that really tells a story? Well, I'm going to show you how I do it using a super fun technique that's been really helpful in my self-portrait photography. Basically, I approach each shoot as if I were making a movie, wearing the different hats of director, set designer, stylist, cinematographer, and so on. I will outline each stage in this video, of course, so that you know exactly what I mean. By the way, I use this framework for my self-portraits, but you could also use it for documentary photography, general portrait photography, street photography, and so on. So let me take you through each stage of the framework now. So step number 1, think like a screenwriter and sort of develop your script. Now, if you want to tell a story through photography, of course, you first need to know what that story actually is. So before your next photo shoot, take a few moments to decide what is the plot, the narrative of your image or photo series. And also very important, who is the hero of the story? This doesn't have to be very elaborate. It could just be, let's say, a lonely woman sitting in her living room. Obviously, you're not writing a movie script here. You just want to have a concept that will serve as the starting point of your photo shoot. I will give you an example of a small photo series I shot a few years ago. These are all self-portraits, and they are actually inspired by a piano piece that I was playing at the time. And that's called Liebestraum by Franz Liszt, in English, A Love Dream. And my idea for this series was that, I came up with this plot basically, that there is this woman who is waiting for her lover to arrive and she's getting ready. And then she starts to get a bit frustrated because it feels like he might not be coming after all. And then she gets a bit drunk and, starts playing the piano. And then she gets a bit more drunk and then passes out on her couch and dreams of this lover arriving, but in reality he's not really arriving. And that was the little narrative for this photo series. And you may have noticed that this little plot or narrative is actually quite heavily inspired by certain emotions. In this case, sadness, love, solitude or loneliness. And that's actually a really helpful tip for storytelling photography in general. When you're thinking about your script for your photograph, always think, what emotions do you want to convey in your images? This is something I always go on about in my videos on my blog, but that's simply because it really works. Because think of virtually any story you like, if it's your favorite novel or a movie or whatever, what drives the behavior of any character? What makes any story interesting or compelling? What enables that hero's journey, that story arch that the hero goes through? If you really think about it, you will find that all of this is based on emotions, just as our lives, of course, are governed by different emotions we feel every day. And that's why it's so important to really think about what emotion do you want to portray in your photograph, because when you do it right, people will actually feel that emotion when they look at your images, which is pretty powerful. And so I usually pick one emotion as the main one, and then I develop my plot or narrative around that. Really try this. It tends to result in quite evocative and more interesting images. Okay, before I move on to the next part of this video, I would be super grateful if you would subscribe to my channel if you like it and give me a thumbs up for this video so I can keep this channel going and make more content for you. Okay, step number 2 in this sort of framework for photos that tell a story is what I call think like a set designer. So before your photo shoot, try and answer the following questions. Where does the plot of your story take place? So what's the location? That could be in nature, in a photo studio, in your home, somebody else's home, public place, and so on. Then think about, do you need any props to tell your story? So props are actually amazing storytelling devices. I use them all the time because objects are really loaded with symbolism. Just think of candles, feathers, skulls, books. These sort of objects, you will see them also in a lot of paintings, and they've been used for centuries to tell certain stories. By the way, the nice thing about objects is that you could also tell a story in your photo without people in it. So you could actually just arrange a still life, and because objects have different meanings or associations, you can really tell a whole story just by arranging a few objects on the table. So yeah, to sum up, always think about where you want your narrative to take place. And second, is there any interesting prop that you can add to your photograph to tell a particular story? Okay, once you've decided on location and props, it's time for the next step. Now you want to think like a stylist, makeup artist, or hairstylist. So if you're a portrait photographer or a self-portrait photographer like me, I highly recommend using hair, makeup, outfits for your storytelling. First, it's a lot of fun, especially if you take self-portraits like me, you get to dress up. But beyond that, it also really helps with developing your character. Here are some examples of where makeup or specific outfits or styling were used to tell a story in the image. By the way, if you find it challenging to come up with ideas for your styling or makeup, it helps to watch some classic movies or movie classics to get inspired. Because in those older movies, let's say 1950s Hollywood, particularly, the hair and makeup play a really big role, and they often support the narrative. I sometimes go to the cinema with the sole purpose of getting inspired, so I recommend you do the same and just take notes of whatever makeup or outfit inspires you. Before we move on to the next step, did you know you can actually register for my free cinematic email challenge? It's very simple. You just get an email every day for 1 week with very detailed prompts for different cinematic portrait shoots. As I said, it's completely free and you can sign up on my website. I'm going to leave you the link below. Now back to the video. Okay, then the next step in this framework is to think like a cinematographer. Oh, it's a hard word. So the cinematographer is responsible for directing the overall look and feel of a movie, including composition, lighting, framing, color, and so on. So by now, you've probably already decided on the narrative of your photo shoot and the setting, hair and styling. Now you're going to make some more creative cinematic decisions. So answer the following questions. How do you want to frame your subject? Then think, what will the composition of your image be? And what lens will you use to achieve that effect? For example, here's an older self-portrait of mine, and it tells a sort of Bible-inspired tale, I guess, of like Eve in the bathtub holding an apple. I don't know, the story doesn't have to make sense to anyone but you. Anyways, I decided to take that photo from a viewpoint above me, as you can see, and I pointed the lens downward towards the water, and I included quite a lot of the water in the frame to really emphasize that contrast between the pink bath water and the green apple. And with cinematography, a big part is that you're trying to create a particular mood. So when it comes to your photo shoot, just again, think about it beforehand and think, what atmosphere or mood do you want to create? I sometimes like to pick one word as a kind of guidance, for example, dreamy or somber or mysterious or whatever. And then once you have this one word, you can then think about what tools you want to use to achieve that mood. For example, composition, framing, lens choice, focal length, or even using certain creative techniques like slow shutter speed or using a very wide aperture, doing double exposure or whatever it is. Another really important tool in cinematography is color grading. In movies, this is done very intentionally to create a certain mood or atmosphere. So with your cinematographer hat on, you want to be just as intentional and use color really as a storytelling device. Now you may be wondering, how on earth can color be a storytelling device? But as you probably already know, colors carry a lot of meaning and symbolism. I mean, there's a whole color psychology theory out there, which states that colors have certain qualities that can evoke specific emotions in people. That's often actually quite instinctive. For example, you probably already know that blue tones can evoke sadness or melancholy. And in most cultures, red stands for passion or love, for example. I'm actually going to link you a nice post on color psychology in the description, so you can check that out if you want to learn more. So yeah, this is really something I actively apply to my images as well. For example, if I take a self-portrait and I want to look sad or lonely in it, I will definitely ramp up the blue tones or color grade it kind of like typically cinematic with yellow and blue tones or orange and green to create a bit of tension in the image. If you actually want to see how I color grade in detail, you can check out this video that I'm going to link now on the screen, and that shows me doing an editing session in Photoshop, so make sure to check that out. Now let's move on to the last step in my storytelling framework, and that is to think like an editor. Okay, so in this final step, you want to fine-tune your footage. For example, if you shot a series, this is the time to arrange the photos in the right order and to think about the story arc of your series. This think like an editor step also includes the actual editing in Photoshop or another software. I often use Photoshop as a kind of storytelling device in its own right. For example, I might add an object or remove certain details that don't really serve the story I want to convey. Also, you could actually add certain details in Photoshop, for example, adding textures like a canvas or paper texture to create a more painterly or artistic look. So that's it. Hopefully you find this 5-step approach helpful for your photography storytelling. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and see you next time.